Welcome, everybody. Thanks for spending some time with us today. We're going to cover some interesting aspects about digital transformation and the challenges behind that. And by way of introduction, I've got a special guest with us today, Paul Heynen from the Innovation Value Institute, which I'm really excited to have with us. He's got lots of background and information and resource to add to the conversation here. So I'll introduce him in a second. But first of all, my name is Damian Dingley. I'm the studio lead for the digital transformation practice, and that encompasses organizational agility and other associated type activities here at Veracity Solutions. For those not familiar with Veracity Solutions, so we're a consulting company that ultimately support clients and customers around the digital transformation. That's the planning and execution of that. So it's very much hands-on and practical support that we lend there. We also provide people in the form of software developers, QAs, architects, and other roles within the agile practice, which I lead out as well, which would be Scrum Master roles, and coaching capability as well, to help organizations really either start their agile practices, or in many cases that may have where they may have derailed, put them back on the rails and improve the processes and the practices. So that's a little bit about what Veracity does. We specialize in highly regulated organizations as well. That's one of our specialities. So banking, healthcare make up quite a large proportion of our client base. So that's a little bit about me. My background's in computer science, but then I got more and more interested in the practice and development and process of delivering software. And I've used lots of different platforms and practices and techniques, and I've really locked into Agile as being, for the most part, most of the time, a very good platform on which to deliver high quality product at speed. So big proponent of that. So that's kind of where I've been leaning over the last few years. So that's a little bit about me. Paul, welcome. Thanks so much for joining. Perhaps you can make an introduction yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Damien, and thanks for inviting me to take part in this webinar. So I'm Paul Heynen, as it says here. I'm the operations manager for the Innovation Value Institute, so the IVI. So we're a research centre within a university in just outside of Dublin in Ireland. So yeah, I'm talking to you from across the Atlantic here. And our research focus is around the area of digital transformation. And we've been developing frameworks and transformation paths for organizations, working very closely with organizations in an ecosystem and with a consortium set up to help develop our research and frameworks and best practices, etc. For 15 years now. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. But yeah, great to be here. My own background is, I guess most recently in the IT, started out though in the engineering field and worked in the semiconductor industry for 15 years before moving over to the academic side of the house. But a strong background in manufacturing and data analytics, artificial intelligence, before it was called that, from the manufacturing sector. Yeah, so yeah, that's my background. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Excellent. So I've got a little slide here that you provided me that kind of talks a little bit about the IVI in a little bit more detail, because I think some of us may not be so familiar with the institute, but Veracity's been involved for a couple of years now, so we're fairly new, but you are a partner with us and you provide a wealth of information, studies, metrics, research articles. Perhaps you want to talk a little bit about where that all comes from, where your knowledge and information has all arisen from over the years.
Yeah, sure. So we set up about 15 years ago, originally in partnership with Intel, who are a close neighbour of ours. They've got a big manufacturing plant quite close to where the university is situated. But we quickly established a very big consortium of companies, which helped us develop our frameworks. And our original focus was the ITCMF, which you can see there in the center of the slide, the IT Capability Maturity Framework. But it wasn't developed just through academic research. It was developed, through working groups and very close collaboration with industry partners and with an ecosystem of partners, from the consulting space, from the large technology enterprise end user space, from other academic organizations, technology providers, platforms, etc. So we have a strong, I guess the key thing that we're trying to get across in this slide is that we have a very strong experience of working with industry to develop solutions that are relevant for industry. We develop training tools and assessments, etc. Yeah, and here you can see some of the names that we've worked with over the years and are still working with. Some of them big, some of them small, but like I say, right across that sort of ecosystem of players, so that we can really, get the best informed research from across the ecosystem of the IT software technology sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty broad based, which is superb because you're touching a lot of different industries there.
Yeah, we sort of specializations in particular industries. So, the healthcare sector, we would have done quite a bit of work in. We're doing quite a bit at the moment in the construction sector, manufacturing, smart cities, public sector. But also we've done a lot of work with the energy sector in the past. You can probably see a few of the logos there from the energy sector, financial services, a lot of work in the past in financial services. So I think very applicable to your client base in terms of the research and the experience that we have, Damian.
Yeah, excellent. So let's dig into this question about navigating barriers. But before we even go there, you sent me a really interesting slide the other day. Why transform? Let's just ask ourselves, why are organizations, companies, and businesses transforming? What's the catalyst? What's leading them to want to make changes? And this diagram chart here, I found fascinating. It came from some MIT research, if I'm correct there, Paul. Mm-hmm. You were involved in, but can you take us a little bit through the diagram here, through the chart, to sort of highlight some of the key outtakes from this?
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, we didn't have any involvement in this research. It's, as you say, it's from MIT. But we've worked closely with those guys in the past, and they've presented at some of our events as well. But I think this is really good slide in terms of the burning platform for transformation and getting better at getting value from technology. So what we see here is on what they've done is that they've done a survey of over 1,300 companies, and what they did was they looked at how good those organizations were on two axes. So one in terms of the customer experience on the y-axis, and then on the other, in the operational efficiency side. So how good are the companies at their business processes. And two things they looked at here was the net margin that those companies make in terms of in comparison to their peers. So how well did they do in terms of their net margin? And you can see there in the top right hand quadrant. So the companies that are what they would consider future ready. So they're really good at customer experience, but also have really good technology platforms and a very good operational efficiency as a result. They would outperform the market by almost 20% in terms of net margin percentage points. 22% of the companies they found were in that quadrant. If you look at the bottom right hand quadrant, most of the companies, just over 50%, are there. So a lot of companies are still struggling with how to use technology and get better value from it. But you can see there the result of that is that they underperform in terms almost 8% percentage points in terms of their business performance. The other two quadrants there, you have organizations in the industrialized, so bottom right hand quadrant, who concentrate more on the operational efficiency side rather than customer experience. 7% of the organizations were there, but interestingly enough, they do slightly outperform their peers in terms of their business performance. Those that solely kind of maybe concentrate on the customer experience, but still have to deal with a lot of, let's say, legacy issues, some siloing, platforms maybe not what they should be. 20% of their organizations were there, but slightly underperforming in terms of net margin. So I think overall it's a really interesting research that they've done. I've put the link there if people want to take a look at that in closer detail. But I'm a great fan of what MIT CISR do. They really do put out some interesting results. But I think it really sets the platform why it's important to really get a handle on digital transformation and improve how you use technology.
Yeah. I mean, that bottom left quadrant, that just, to me, just speaks volumes, because I would say, I don't know, I don't want to say 90%, but 80% of our clients that come to us with particular issues they're trying to overcome, whether that's in the transformation itself, building out DevOps, CI/CD, or building new product, or just trying to change the focus, we tend to end up talking initially to the technology part of the organization. And the amount of siloing spaghetti nightmare that we uncover as a cause for the problems that they're having, and one of the big driving forces to transform is that very thing, is the fact that a lot of the organizations siloed off, and some of the architecture's out of date with the code that they're trying to build new features and functions for, that's just not capable of supporting that new functionality, the new vision that maybe a sales team or a set of clients may have. That's really been a huge roadblock, and some of the main issues that when we start engaging with the client, that's what we find. And they typically come to us knowing that, but often as not, sometimes we still have to reveal that to other parts of the organization, which kind of leads me to this slide here. It would be lovely, and there are exceptions, but it'd be lovely if a business comes to us and they have this unsiloed, beautiful transparency across the organization, across manufacturing, across management and sales and IT and software engineering, and prepared to listen to each other and break those silos down. But often as not, this is more representative of a lot of organizations that we work through. I will say that the organizations that maybe started from the ground up trying to avoid this because they know it's problematic, they're not working in alignment, they're not cohesive. So some companies have had the opportunity as startups or whatever to identify this as a problem. They may be out of this situation and flowing very smoothly and producing the goods. And you may have had organizations that have been through a digital transformation who've broken those barriers down. There's a key point of success right there. But a lot of the times it looks like this. Paul, do you want to comment on this illustration a little bit?
Yeah, no. So we see similar things with organizations that we've worked with, and who take our assessments and use our tools. And it's usually when you have these kind of silos or differences within the organization, it's usually a good way to start with using some of the tools that we provide to help with breaking down those silos and getting a sense for where the differences exist within the organization, and help to open up that conversation. But yeah, a lot of the cases we've seen where for some of our tools to be used is in different situations like that. One key one there is recently acquired company. We've seen that quite a bit where where there's acquisitions, mergers, etc., to really get a sense of what the capabilities are within both organizations, or whatever organizations are coming together, to really understand where those capabilities and where the improvements and priorities can be placed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key things that we found as a way into this and starting to have these silos at least talk within each other and then ultimately talk across silos is everyone, is to pinpoint something that everyone's going to react to. They've all got problems. So, individually, they may just be keeping them to themselves. They may be sharing them. They may actually get somebody to listen. But if we start with, focusing on those individual problems, we found that's a good starting point, because they can identify with those immediately. Now, they may be a little microcosm of the overall difficulties and challenges that the organization may have, but at least you can get people talking, even if it's separate to begin with. The key then is to sort of roll this back and determine the root cause and dig deeper and say, well, why is that happening? Okay, why is that particular issue happening, wherever it is in the organization, and then dig down and do exercises like the 5 whys. If people are familiar with that, where you keep asking, why is this happening? Why did and then get digging deeper and asking, why is that happening? So that's one of the exercises. But the key is to start the process, start the conversation happening. And what we found is, well, and typically a new client of ours who's making some, reaching out to Veracity, as for example, they'll probably come with a particular problem they've got, or a particular issue, particular challenge they have, whether it's in the transformation or whether it's new product development. They'll come to us with that very specific thing identified, and which is a great starting point. But it's really, there's something under the covers there that we need to really get into. And as this illustrates, there are barriers all over the place, the silo being one of them, the communication being another. We've got to jump over those hurdles. And the important thing is we have to have some empathy. We have to understand the context in which that organization is operating, and really to uncover those barriers, to reveal them. How do we go about that? How do we get them talking? And I think all of the things that we've spoken to, Paul, you shared some slides already. All the things we've spoken to up to this point, really, I could highlight in 4 key, in 4 key bullet points. Although these aren't bullet pointed, but if you look at all the evidence that we've just shared, even at this high level, the barriers really, can be summarized in a lack of alignment. Okay, differing perceptions of the problem. Okay, from different parts of the organization, because one part of the organization isn't really being honest with the other. We've seen that time and time again. Nobody maybe wants to admit their failings. Don't let business know that we're struggling with delivering this product because we don't have the right CI/CD pipeline in place. Keep that undercover. They don't want to hear it, and we don't want to tell them. So, which is, as you can imagine, if you're trying to transform a whole organization, that's no key to success there. And as we've talked about, this siloing does not function in today's world. I could summarize again those slides you showed, Paul. I could say, well, I think it's all, why do people transform? Because they want to be agile. They want to react to changes in the environment, changes in competition, changes in the market. They want to react quickly and still be relevant. But if we don't have the organizations talk, the technology groups working closely with the business groups and they're siloed off, that's really not going to be helpful at all. And ultimately, we need to understand what the business value is, and focus the organization on the business. And there's lots of books around that. We've got some material around project to product, which is a huge movement towards focusing, instead of siloing like the IT group off as a cost center, actually bringing them into the fold, working closely with business to focus on the value and the stream of that value as it goes, and the workflow of that business, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's software development. It's watching at each point within the organization who, everyone's valued contribution to that in order to get this product out that satisfies the customer, is of high quality, and yet the organization can still react quickly to changes. And the way to do that is to focus the whole business on the value that each group within that organization is contributing to the delivery of that product. So, moving IT out of a cost center is one example of that, out of that silo. So just a quick, this is a slide as well, Paul, that you sent me again the other day. I love this slide. There's a lot of detail in here. But this really comes from a lot of research, 134 organizations, where they found their barriers to be, and the frequency of what what was being reported, how often those similar things were being reported to you. Do you want to spend a moment just maybe reviewing some of the highlights here?
Yeah, so it's you see we kind of put these different barriers to organizations when they do some of our assessments, our digital readiness one in particular, just to ask them what are the kind of the barriers within their organization to sort of technology projects and technology implementations and digital transformation as a whole. But it's interesting that the cultural issues are the ones the resistance to change are kind of always the top one that comes up. So it's not necessarily about the technology. It's that human component that really needs to be focused on. Insufficient funding there is the second one. Organizations do struggle in terms of how they allocate their funding across across their portfolio, and we see a lot of organizations that what tends to happen, we talk about communication and alignment. I think it's sometimes it gets dumped on the IT department or on the technology department. They're the ones that have to change, and they're the ones that have to do the work and align themselves. But I think businesses need to understand what's possible with technology and understand that there's costs, and it's not always easy to implement these technologies. So there has to be a bit of give and take there. It can't always be demand, and it can't be always demand led. They have to understand that there is a supply issue as well. So that that's some of the key conversations that we see around these different barriers. Skill shortages, it's a key thing across the world. It's very difficult to get good, talented people that really understand technology. That's a key issue across the geographies that we work in. Different ones there as you go down through it, lack of organizational experimentation, just maybe a little bit, less innovative. Something that kind of comes up maybe down the midway, data management issues. People don't tend to see it as a barrier, but very often when you scratch beneath the surface, that's something that comes up a lot, is that, incompatible systems, bad architecture does tend to slow things down. And it tends to be something that sits under the surface that a lot of organizations don't necessarily recognize when they first look at it. So different ways to cut this, but this is just what we found across the board, and it's going to vary from organization to organization.
An excellent list. And again, this correlates very closely to the experiences we've had with our clients. The things that really become a barrier. To really prove the point here, there is a plethora of books and learned information about how to solve some of these problems and identify them. And it's funny, just this morning, I was sort of digging through my library. I like real books to read as well, not just digital online. But I was looking through my library, and I've got that one. Okay, probably people are familiar with that. Here's a nice story about failure. I know people are familiar with that. That's Gene Kim. My blurring. You can't see it, but anyway, there's Gene Kim, the Unicorn Project. There's Accelerate, Jez Humble and Gene Kim again. Then there's, I mentioned earlier, Project to Product with Mick Kirsten. All these great volumes of very useful material, identifying all these problems and hopefully producing solutions. We're definitely within the industry, we're struggling as being identified here. But what we aim to do is to overcome some of those struggles and help people get on the right path, either early on as they're planning it, or midstream to do some course correction. So what are we proposing here? The key, as is obvious now, is to bring the organizations together. Now, here we have a wonderful nuclear family from 1957, I believe, around the Thanksgiving table. And you can see that everyone's smiling, ready to tuck into their Thanksgiving dinner. The first point I want to make is they're actually managing to sit around the table, okay, and have some kind of at least preliminary, probably not too in-depth the conversations, but at least exchanging pleasantries, as it were. And that's an important starting point, that they've got the family together and they are sharing a meal and talking. Now, as that meal progresses, as is so typical of Thanksgiving, and depending on how much wine is being consumed, potentially, those conversations may dig up some other issues that are going on with that family. I'm sure they all have, issues that they probably ought to be sharing, but sometimes they don't come to the surface. So, but hopefully, eventually, there are some issues that are surfaced, and hopefully, if it's a nice civil environment, they have a sensible adult conversation about it. But the point is, open up the conversation. Okay, time and time again, we've worked with clients that are, that they're very siloed off. They can't, they've tried sharing their struggles with parts of the organization. Other people either don't want to listen, or they don't want to know, or it may be in a lot of cases where there's just no proper channels to communicate those issues up, so that overall the organization is aligned and understanding those problems. And when you're siloed, everyone's going to have a different perspective on a situation. We see that all the time, to the point where there's a lot of smoke and mirrors being played between groups, because they just don't want to admit their challenges, sometimes their failings. There's some kind of hesitancy to do that. That is not going to work. You're not going to succeed. You may solve a small problem within your space, your own independent, area that you're responsible for, but it isn't going to solve the big problem. You're going to run into another set of barriers not long after you've solved that other one, because of these issues of just having the whole organization aligned around a single point. So one of the things that I think I learned a lot working with Paul and the IVI was their wealth of assessment, online assessment, self-assessment, questionnaire documentation that they have, and resources that they have. They go into a lot of depth, and Paul's going to talk a little bit about that in a second. But one of the things that Veracity wanted to do is say, can we distill, these questionnaires from IVI, they're very comprehensive, they're excellent, and the answers to those questionnaires are, can be interpreted and evaluated against industry results as well, and you can do some peer review and things like that, which is absolutely tremendous. But one of the things we wanted to do is make the entry path, if you like, into understand, having an individual initially being able to articulate their problem, and then opening up a conversation, and potentially then sharing those answers with other people within their organization, or even better, having other parts of that organization answer the same questions. We can start to build up a model of really how particular areas within that organization, how particular part activities and transformation activities are going and perceived, and how the business is doing overall. We can get a nice perspective of that across the organization. So we developed 4 key questions based on IVI material, and also based on our own experiences with our own clients. And I really wanted to sort of dig into that a little bit, and just show you what those questions are, and a little bit of the value that the answers give us to allow us to open up deeper conversations. So the first question is really to set context and just see where is that organization in terms of a digital transformation. And I would also include new product development. You could kind of just, either of those to me is valid, because sometimes all these issues are arising, these challenges are arising just because they're trying to push a new product through in a timely way. So where are they in that journey? Have they started it? Are they planning it? Or are they underway? Is something derailing? That just allows us to have a little bit of context around their journey. Any comments on this, Paul, on this particular kickoff question?
Well, I mean, I guess most organizations are doing something in terms of their how they're aligning their technology to the business objectives. But as you can see, maybe in terms of the progress that organizations are making from that slide from MIT, a lot of organizations are stuck in that sort of bottom left-hand quadrant. It's I think it's really about how organizations plan what they want to do, but what they do once they've got underway. I think I heard a great quote once. I can't remember who it was from. It's think big, start small, but do something now. So it's I think that's good advice. But yeah, I think definitely the strategic side of things, always, referring back to what the strategic objectives of the organization are, and how do the projects and the portfolio of what the organization is trying to do match those strategic objectives. I think that's always key to understand that, and to be able to communicate that across the organization so that everybody knows what they're working towards.
Yeah. I think for the most part these days we're seeing most people have started. I think those who haven't even begun this are going to be really struggling. They're going to need help. But most organizations that we've been involved in have at least in a planning stage, or at the very least they're already underway.
I think the recent pandemic has really been a forcing function for that. It's really showing organizations that if you're not doing this, you need to be doing something now, because it was organizations that really were agile and were prepared and could pivot, coped best. I know it's different from industry to industry, but it was those who were prepared who could really tackle such a really disruptive change like that. Sorry.
Yeah. No, absolutely. COVID's a great example of that. The lockdown. Some companies were ready and rolling. They had, they could pivot as needed. They had mechanisms and the organizations in place to make those pivots quickly. Others, unfortunately, didn't succeed so well. And of course, it does depend on the particular industry we're talking about here, particular market they're working in. But nevertheless, going back, it's the ability to pivot, change, be agile, and adapt. The second question, we dig a little bit more detail here, and we want the client to really just give us an idea, at least the top three out of these, out of this list, where they think the biggest challenges are, and pick their top three. And Paul, you'll see that a lot of these questions align to very specific questionnaires that IVI, in some cases, provide deeper analysis and deeper assessments for. So this is by way of leading in potentially to something a bit more deeper, and really uncovering some low-level issues that are ultimately creating barriers or could potentially be barriers to success. So this is a starting point for that. One of the things, question A, I'll just take a couple of examples: delivery and time to value, or delivery time. How long is it taking an organization to deliver a new product or a feature or whatever it might be? That's so critical, and that opens up all kinds of questions. How do the new ideas get funneled into and being signed off as an agreed worthy investment in terms of new feature sets that are going to satisfy the customer need? How does that process get managed? How long does it take for that to get signed off and budget approved and all those things, especially in a traditional organization? And then what's the process to get it to deliver, get it to that delivery point? Are there good CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous development practice on? Are there barriers to that in the flow? Are there a series of committees and gates to jump through, which slows things down? Are they really necessary? Those kind of things. So that opens up a whole set of other questions and debates around that. And then, organization, budget and finances, how are they dealing with legacy applications, and communication is a big one. Are the is communication a barrier here? And that for us, and I think Paul, you would agree, that that triggers so many other questions later on, but at least we're making a start. And the idea being that these 4 questions, the client should be able to, answer these pretty quickly. We're not too much overhead, and ultimately share potentially the same set of questions with other members of the organization. Paul, any additional comments on this?
No, I mean, I think that mirrors quite well what we saw in some of the previous slides around the barriers. Maybe a bit more succinctly, maybe less options. And it's a great place to start. I mean, I think all organizations are going to be dealing with these in some way, shape, or form. But I think the key thing is really to try and prioritize, because you can't tackle everything at once.
Right.
And that's what we always try to encourage organizations is, really look where is the, what's going to give you the biggest bang for buck in terms of, the changing of your organization, and where do you really need to focus? And it's about having that conversation within the organization.
Yeah.
And I think it's always interesting to see the range of responses that you get from an organization. How aligned are they internally in terms of where the problems are? And, are you getting different responses from different parts of the organization? So, that's even just looking at those kind of data points and how they vary within an organization can often be extremely useful as well.
Yeah.
Hey, Damian, if I might interject, if you can navigate back to the first of the 4 critical questions, we have a question from an attendee. How often do you encounter an enterprise that doesn't even fully understand what digital transformation is or entails?
Yes, that does happen. Now, and Paul, you can speak to this though. So the term digital transformation is overused, I think, and it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. But that, going back a slide or two, sometimes, we don't have we don't typically have clients that come along and say, "Hey, Veracity, we want you to digitally transform us." Okay, well, here's the book. Off you go, and we'll come and do a workshop with you. No, that doesn't happen. I don't think it's happened. But what typically happens, to the point of the question there, is that we'll have somebody who's got a problem. They're trying to deliver a new product, and one of the questions was, how long does it take for that new product to end up from a vision to being put out to production? And there may be a technical issue with that. There may be, their architecture's at fault somewhere, and it's very difficult for the software developers to navigate the old architecture. And so they'll come to us with that particular problem, very specific, and we'll start there. That's how we maybe make that initial introduction. But then as we work with that organization, solving their architectural issues, we'll uncover a few other things. And that might lead to, well, in fact, you probably want to change your whole you want to introduce DevOps into your organization to speed up the delivery of your software. Or you may want to relook at how you budget for new functionality, because your architecture's not, you haven't got enough resources there, or your budget for re-architecting isn't there, which obviously channels back up to the business to say, where's your focus? Don't you really realize your value is in delivering these great products, but you can't modify them and improve them if your architecture is causing you to slow that process down, because it's just what do you have? Spaghetti. It's spaghetti. And if the business, the people who are writing the checks and assigning budgets, if they don't understand that properly, and they don't realize that this is all part of the flow of value through the organization, then they're going to really struggle. And that ultimately leads to this kind of what we might term digital transformation. And it might start in small areas, as you don't want to boil the sea, right? And as Paul just mentioned, you've got to start small somewhere. And sometimes we start with those individual technical issues for the most part. If that helps explain a little bit, answers that question. Is that all right, Jared? Do you think that hits the point?
I believe so. Thank you.
Maybe if I could just comment there as well, guys.
Please, Paul, yeah.
I think it. I mean, it's, does the organization even fully understand? I mean, I think it does regularly come up that they don't completely understand what exactly they want, and I think you're right, Damien. It is a much abused term, but I think the key really is it's changing the organization to work much more closely together. And I think that's kind of one of the central themes that you're trying to get across here. It's those new ways of working to deliver, much more value from technology projects and avoid the pitfalls that come along with, trying to implement technology within the organization. But I think it all does come back to strategy. So what does the organization at a strategic level want to do with technology to improve its business?
Yeah.
And how do you maximize the efficiency to which you do that with? I think it comes down to that. But yeah, a lot of organizations don't always understand, or it's not communicated necessarily well enough across the organization. So maybe the leadership thinks they understand what digital transformation, but does everybody working together towards that vision? Is it communicated enough? Is it reinforced enough on a regular basis to achieve what the organization wants to? So sorry, yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, no, thanks, Paul. That's great. If you look at question 2 here, if you look at the potential answers here to the biggest challenge, you'll see that each one of these, tackles a particular area within that business that particular individual who's answering these questions will identify as, within my group, I'm feeling that our customer satisfaction is really low. Does is that, and that be coming from a salesperson answering this, or even a CEO, okay, somebody in the marketing group perhaps. But so it's a very individual, I wouldn't say it's isolated or independent of other things, by no means that, but certainly it's part of a complete jigsaw puzzle of different things that are going on within that organization that are causing them to not perform at the level they really want to be performing or need to be performing in today's modern market and industry. And one thing can lead to another. And so you could say there's a transformation going on in our customer satisfaction levels. We want to go from, B- to A+. All right, well, what are the, and to your point, Paul, we've got to understand we don't know how to go there. All right, we don't really know how to fix that problem. All we know is our customers aren't very satisfied. Okay, but we start at that point, and then through a series of other interviews and questionnaires, we can, workshops, we can actually dig into that and find out really where is the root cause of that customer satisfaction problem, and identify different parts within the organization that maybe just aren't failing at some point, or not performing to their optimal, or there's some kind of culture within that organization that's not allowing them to meet those standards, and that becomes a transformation. Okay, so we transform that piece of the organization to improve customer satisfaction, but it might hit multiple areas of that business in order to improve that. Here's some, I wanted to add competition into these 4 questions, because honestly, I think first of all, people can always, that's such an easy one. It's an easy question. It's an easy one to think about. And some organizations don't care about the competition, then they're going to do their own thing. Others are going to be paranoid and almost at paralysis as to what to do. And again, to empathize with the client, we need to know where they stand and where the individuals within the organization stand on that. Now, the CEO may have a different opinion from the software developer on team XYZ, because software developer team XYZ happens to know that there's competition out there with much better CI/CD or much better ways of developing new features. Why doesn't the CEO know about that? That's back to communication. But we can reveal all this from answering these questions, at least as a starting point. Anything else, Paul, you want to add there?
No, I mean, I think looking at what your competitor is doing is always a healthy thing, but I think keeping a focus on what your customers are doing as well is always something to bear in mind, and maybe how your competitors addressing those market changes. And we see competitor focus, it's different from industry to industry. Some industries have been completely disrupted by new entrants, whereas others, maybe in the more regulated side of things are not necessarily so. But we see it more and more. Even regulated industries are being more and more disrupted by new entrants. Financial services, fintech players are coming in. I'm not sure what it's like in the US, but in Europe, you've got constantly new entrants coming into the fintech space that are really disrupting the big players. And they do need to really focus on what competitors are doing, but I think really keep an eye on where your customers are going and what are the customer trends. So that's kind of a key thing to bear in mind as well.
Yeah. And the last question is somewhat related to the competition, but it's more to do with the ecosystem around you. And I think we just mentioned one, COVID, and lockdown and things like that, and that ability to adjust quickly. We typically find, agile teams, an organization that is fully committed to agile and DevOps and things like that have a lot better success rate of pivoting than more traditional, top-down organizations. And so we just want to capture, this is kind of an open-ended question, but we want to capture any additional information that, again, might help us set context, set empathy with the client to understand what they feel are external threats to them. Maybe new businesses, disrupting their market could be that. We could qualify that as a competitor, but certainly what are those other external threats that you may be thinking about that we need to know about in order to start that conversation. So those are the 4 questions. What's the value in all that? I think you've been hearing the value in mine and Paul's conversations between each other, our comments. There's a huge amount of value in even just answering those 4 questions, 10 minutes, I believe, right off the get-go. Just getting that information out, thinking about the answers. There's huge value there, and you just compound that value once you have others within the organization answer that same set of questions, and then you can do a comparison and look at the different perspectives and points of view coming from different parts of the organization. So on the right here is just a summary of where we believe that's value to be just by answering these 4 questions and getting started. The other thing I really like about the online questionnaire is it's quick and easy, number 1. Number 2, it's non-threatening. All right, it's really at the beginning anyway, it's the individual answering the questions as honestly. There's no threat there. It can almost be done anonymously. And then you can share those same questions out across the organization and get those answered anonymously as well. So it's a safe environment to maybe breach areas within the organization or breach those challenges where sometimes information is being held back. This is a way of opening the channels up, at least a starting point for that, because it does open, it allows us then to open up the more difficult questions. But just sharing the answers across the organization, saying, hey, look, there are different perspectives here. Let's talk these through. Why do we have different perspectives? What are you seeing that I'm not seeing, kind of thing. And here's the money. So there is a QR code. If you're interested, we would love to hear from anyone on the webinar today, or anyone in the future that may be listening to this on demand later on. There are the 4 questions. If you have issues and you want to surface these a bit and get a conversation started, here's the place to go. So grab your phone, grab the QR code, and hopefully you're off to the races there. There's the website, and I think, Jerry, we'll get back pretty quickly on that once we start receiving those questions and answers to those questions. So, as we've been mentioning, where does this lead? So let's say we've answered those 4 questions. We've got some information back from a client, from an individual. then we probably more than likely we've said, this is great. Could you get some other people either within your group, within your department, to answer those same questions? And even better still, could you get other departments, other potentially siloed groups to answer the same set of questions as well? Because we're going to be able to build a much more, a larger view, ecosystem view of the whole environment within that organization, and the different perspectives of how that business is doing and where the challenges are. That's such useful and powerful information that then what we propose to do would be to do some more targeted IVI-based assessments on specific areas of that organization. And in a second, Paul can kind of just highlight some of those specific assessments that we might tackle based on the answers we get from those four questions. And then what we like to do is put together some workshops where we gather the individuals from the organization who are involved in the questionnaire. We gather them around the table, and we host and facilitate a healthy environment workshop where we surface this information. We find out where the differences of opinions are, and ultimately we're aligned. We try and align on those opinions, and then begin to prioritize what the solutions might be, one piece at a time. And we can do this, through, as I said, workshops. The other things we do at Veracity, we're very good at are, product inceptions, planning, release planning, and things like that. And what's been really useful to us recently is looking at what IVI provide around their maturity framework, which again helps organizations follow a path and measure and look at how they're improving over time against certain parameters and certain factors. So these 4 questions are really a very early starting point, a very useful starting point to really open up the conversation and really start approaching the problems with experience, with a lot of information and knowledge, all in aid of avoiding all those barriers we've been looking at that prevent organizations having a successful experience. And so, Paul, just to finish up here, if you could just provide a little bit of detail on some of the additional resources and activities that IVI provide around assessments and around the framework, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Damian. So, we have this assessment portfolio. So, in total, there's more than 40 assessments that can be taken by an organization depending on what they want to do. But we kind of typically start with maybe one of those top 5. So the digital readiness looks at, a lot of the questions we looked at here today, but maybe in a bit more, a bit more detail, as you said. But at the same time, these take about 20 minutes to do each of those 5 assessments. Cloud, typically sometimes organizations just really want to look at what are the pitfalls, what are the challenges, what are the issues I need to consider in beginning a cloud journey. I mean, I know a lot of companies are possibly on a cloud journey already, but this this really helps in terms of understanding in more detail the capabilities that you need. Cybersecurity, data protection, etc., very, very topical, very of concern to more and more to organizations, and we see every day, breaches, etc., that come into the news. Again, looking at the capabilities that underline those. The DevOps readiness, that's very much in your world, guys. You're the experts there, but I think this really helps in terms of looking at the organization and understanding again those core capabilities from infrastructure to the agility of the organization, how they interact with the customers, how the business interacts with the technology function, and then finally enterprise innovation and agility, looking at the overall innovation and agility capability of the organization, not just in the technology function, but very much that organizational agility piece.
Just before,
and then, sorry, go ahead.
Interrupt, but I just wanted to mention on the cloud readiness one. That's a super interesting one to us because we still get a lot of organizations that are asking, hey, we want to move, from on-premise, our server sitting under the stairs. We want to move to the cloud, but we've got all these concerns, one of them being exposure of our IP, things like that. We still have, still has that, and for good reason for them. But there's a lot of miscommunication going on there, and I think, looking at your cloud readiness assessment, I think that touches on a lot of those points. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. Yeah. No, it really covers a lot of those bases, and even what do you want to do with cloud? I mean, is it just lift and shift, or are you really interested in re-architecting for, let's say a microservices type, type thing? But it's there's lots of things to consider, from vendor lock-in to, regulatory concerns, security, like you say, even IP protection.
Yeah. And then perhaps talk a bit about the
yeah. So I mean, all of these assessments are underpinned by the ITCMF, the IT Capability Maturity Framework, and we have, that's probably our most popular one, is the executive assessment, where you're looking across all 37 ITCMF capabilities. And typically, an organization that's really looking at their technology strategy will look at that assessment. And it's not just for the technology function; it can be taken by business users as well. And we get we see organizations get a lot of value from the conversation that comes from both sides of the organization taking such an assessment. And then we've got 37 deep dive critical capability assessments that look at, let's say, innovation management, or enterprise architecture management, solution delivery, benefits assessment. So a whole detailed set of assessments that can be done by an organization. So.
Yeah,
and here's an overview of the 37 critical capabilities of the framework. I won't,
you're not going to go through the individual ones.
No, we won't go through them in too much detail, but just to show that there's a lot of depth, a lot of breadth to the framework. We wouldn't recommend anybody tackle all these at once. And really, what the questionnaires, the assessments that we provide, are really about prioritizing the focus areas for improvement, where to start, and help the organizations, get better value from their investments.
Yeah. I mean, there's a wealth of information here and guidance, and yeah, it's quite tremendous what you guys have managed to build up over the years. Excellent work. All right, well, that concludes the webinar. Again, I want to thank everyone for attending today, and I really enjoyed sharing this with Paul, especially bringing his knowledge and insights into it. So Jared, I'll hand back to you in case there are any other outstanding questions. I know we're kind of right up against time right now, but back to you, Jared.
Just have one at the moment. If you have a question for Damian Paul, feel free to utilize the chat and the Q&A. I have a question relating back to the graph on why to transform, Damian, so if you can navigate to that slide. Yeah. The question is, what are some of the examples of businesses or enterprises that are in the upper right quadrant? And is there a vertical that typically tends to get stuck in the lower left?
Okay, I'm navigating back.
Maybe Paul could take that while you're navigating.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, please.
Yeah, so I mean, typically in terms of future ready, you're going to see, digital native companies. So, companies that do this from scratch are typically in that future ready. But there are some, maybe in the financial services that are there and across all different industries, but they tend not to be in the majority. And some of the what MIT advocate in their research, and in that link that you'll see, is they've kind of identified maybe some ways that organizations can sort of tackle the journey to that future ready. So, do you go first for a integrated customer experience, and then sort of shift across and fix your operational efficiency issues, or do you fix those operational issues first and then tackle the customer experience? So, and there's different things that need to be sort of thought about, which we wouldn't be able to go into in too much detail. But I think the silos and spaghetti, I think it tends to be organizations that haven't necessarily been disrupted, those industries that haven't necessarily been disrupted yet in the same way as maybe some of the technology industries, because we've seen with the likes of Netflix, let's say, or Uber, or Airbnb, they completely disrupted the existing businesses that were there. But you know, the silos and spaghetti, it's not unusual. It's across all different sectors. But I would say it's you know, the majority of industries that are companies that are there are ones that don't necessarily have that forcing function yet, or they haven't, you know, necessarily come across it yet.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. One more question, that's all we'll have. Regarding barriers to transformation, do you have any predictions as to which of those will be bigger issues in the future, i.e. will a skills shortage drive automation when it comes to innovation?
Do you want to take that again, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, I think the cultural ones, you know, I think that comes up for many reasons. You know, the skills thing is definitely an issue, you know, across industries, but it's also driven by some of the cultural issues in some companies, and also the willingness maybe and the innovation capabilities within organizations, because the smart kids coming out of college, they want to go and work for the most innovative companies, right? And they want to go and work for those companies that have addressed the cultural issues, that allows them to contribute to you know, the most to those organizations and feel valued as employees. So some of these are interlinked. But I think, you know, that cultural issue one is there for a reason. I think a lot of organizations really need to address that to you know, really get on the road to transformation, because it underpins so many issues within organizations. I think it's the enabler. Once you have that culture of cooperation, of understanding, of you know, collaboration, that really helps to fix a lot of the problems that organizations you know, come across.
Yeah, I'll add, that's excellent, Paul. I'll add to that. So in again, project to product, which I'm trying to show here, Mick Kirsten, the first 3 or 4 chapters really talk about cultural challenges, and he talks about the 4th industrial revolution and all that stuff. And I know that terms, again, some of those terms have been overused, but I think it really comes down to, is your organization culturally aware? In other words, are the mindset, is the mindset of that organization tuned into the 20th, you know, what we have as the 21st century, you know, in terms of delivering quicker, not applying. See, a lot of the traditional companies, and this is, Mick really describes this in detail in his book, but a lot of the traditional companies that have grown over, you know, from the past century, and they've grown and they've established themselves, the measures of success that they have and the measures of quality and productivity, all those standards that were developed from manufacturing. You know, he talks about Ford automobile, etc., like that. Those were okay then. They worked very well, but they don't work in today's modern, high speed, highly changing, highly dynamic environment. And if you have an organization that's sort of embedded in those traditional ways of managing, you know, the culture just isn't set up to deal with the likes of an Uber or a Lyft or whatever it was coming along and completely disrupting it. You're just gonna, you can live in a bubble, but eventually you're going to be affected by it. And actually, Mick does say, you know, some industries are affected more than others, but every category will be affected at some point. And if you do not get on top of this soon enough, you're just going to be left behind. And he gives some great examples from the last century of companies that thought they were on the top of their game, and within a year or two they were out of business, because they just didn't get it, and they weren't, you know, they didn't see what was going on, and they weren't there to react to it. They weren't getting the right information, and it was down to a cultural issue.
I think, I mean, even just to, if you think back to, you know, what happened in the 80s with the, you know, with the quality movement in manufacturing, Damian, I think, you know, a lot of that was a cultural thing as well. And if you look back to some of the key thought leaders in that, like Deming, etc., you know, going back right back to the 50s, they advocated for a cultural change. And that's what drove a lot of those transformations of those industries, and, you know, even going back to it. So a lot of this stuff isn't new. It's been around a long time, and we conveniently forget it sometimes. But at the end of the day, it's about organizations coming together to fix business problems and doing it in an efficient way. And that's a cultural issue at heart, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again, Paul. And thank you to everyone for attending and listening and asking the questions. That's great. I love somebody to jump on this and play around with that, and we can get back to you with whatever challenges you're facing with that. And if you've got additional questions, please reach out to Veracity, and we're happy to answer those as well.